in '96 when I had my first taste of Ravenel Beverly Leclos 86, and that kind of was the epiphany wine. And I was like, how can a wine taste like this? And that time the wine was 10 years old, and I was just like, this is kind of crazy that a white wine can be so ethereal, so powerful, so light all at once.
You're listening to the Vint Podcast, bringing you expert interviews, alternative market insights, and exclusive access to the world of wine and spirits. Enjoy the show.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Vint Podcast. My name is Brady, joined as always in the studio by Billy Galanko. How you doing, Billy?
Pretty well today. We've had this horrible big bay window that we have in our house, and there was a leak somehow. So with all the rain over the winter, rain got in and it became foggy. So we basically had a 6 foot by 4 foot window that we couldn't really see out of until today. It was replaced, so it's a great day.
Nice. You're like, oh man, it's actually been raining all this time. I had no idea.
Oh yeah, no, it's like I needed contacts or something again. I don't know. It was weird, but it's great. So yeah, life's good.
Well, what have you? I know we want to talk a little bit about what we've been drinking and just what you've been up to recently. Just in terms of personal wine discovery, what have you been looking at?
Yeah, so after all of my exams and waiting for the results here, I've been kind of meandering all over. Obviously, we had our whiskey rounds, but been leaning more to like some of the natural wine stuff. Been drinking a lot of stuff that's been in my. You remember I cleaned out my wine cellar, like my offsite one, so I've been trying to drink through some of those. So like last weekend we went through like a 2017 Ridge. This weekend
Montebello.
I had. Yeah, or not Montebello, Merlot, sorry. 2017 Merlot. I just was in the mood for a Merlot. Nice. Yeah, and then this weekend, for example, we did a 2015 Tablas Creek Spirit de Tablas. It's their premium line. I had a half bottle of that just sitting around, so I wanted to try that. I had a Blau Fränkisch from Baden in Germany. That was 2017. I found that at this local natural wine shop, but they have it's kind of what I was talking about with Constantine. It's like old wines that are made in a natural way, but they're basically traditional expressions. But this was like a VDP German wine, so VDP the top producers from Baden. That was Blau Fränkisch, which is called what is it called in Germany? It's normally oh my god, I'll think of it in a second. It ends with burger. But I can't remember what it is here. I'll look it up. But anyway, I found a 2017
burger.
I found a 2017 for just it was like $20, and I was like, wow, like why isn't everybody buying these? So I got it, and it was great. So those are a few that I've been getting into. What about you? What have you been leaning into these days?
Speaking of $20, well, I haven't had this recently, but there's a $4.99 Gewürztraminer at Trader Joe's. If you have wine at your Trader Joe's, which is like crazy, it has to be one of the best value wines in the planet.
What is it?
It's been a while since I've had it, but you made me think of that when you said $20.
What is it?
It is oh gosh, it's a lady's name on the label.
Lemberger is the name of Blau Fränkisch in Germany. What do you think?
Neither of us can remember names of things when we get on and start recording.
I always remember the Hungarian name is Kek Frankosch. I can remember that. For some reason, it sounds like Blau Fränkisch to me. It also means blue Frankish. And then the Germans just came in and are like Lemberger. And then everybody's like, what?
It's okay. So it's Emma Reichart. There's a Pinot Noir Rosé. There's a Gewürztraminer, and there's a Riesling, dry Riesling. And at least at my Trader Joe's, where I used to go in Virginia, they were all under $7. And they're just out of this world for that price. So, yep, Emma Reichart. But haven't had any of those recently. Actually, been buying a lot of whiskey, been drinking a decent amount of whiskey. Last wine I had was, I guess actually on Sunday for Easter, as we were going out the door, I was like, oh, I should bring a bottle of wine to our family gathering, and I grabbed a bottle of champagne out of my cellar. I actually can't even tell you what producer it was, but I know it was 2012. It was good.
Nice.
So vintage champagne. It was yummy. I think it's something I got from like Last Bottle, some online retailer somewhere. I got a good price on it, and yeah, it was great. Had it with like a lemon cheesecake sort of dessert thing, which was really good actually. Even though like a super sweet dessert, but it worked out because I felt like there was a lot of like curdy, like certainly a ton of like that brioche quality, but also like lemon curd quality, and actually worked well with like a lemony dessert, which was kind of cool.
Kind of like a compliment rather than a contrast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I usually go for contrast that just like always feels more comfortable and easier for me. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, like spicy, sweet, or fatty and acidic. Like it just makes sense in my mind. So, actually, we had talked at a different time about how my favorite is like champagne and macarons, like the little almond wafer desserts. Really good. Yeah, that's one of my favorite pairings, and something that feels like it wouldn't be super good right off the bat. But in terms of whiskey, yeah, just buying a lot of kind of like mid-level bourbon and other things that are like some are
mostly
fairly
American.
allocated. Yeah, some are fairly allocated, and others aren't really, just kind of building up a stock of things. And yeah, I need to cut back because I'm getting to it's like, oh, well, like, I can't find this for, a good price near me. I'll buy it. Like if I'm out somewhere or a friend is traveling. So I've been accumulating all these bottles for prices that I wouldn't be able to get them locally. So
Nice. On the spirits front, I'm still working through that Hugh Johnson book, The Story of Wine, that I talk about every podcast, because I'm going to keep doing so for probably 6 more months as I listen through. But I'm in the 1600s now. And apparently the Dutch, while they couldn't grow any themselves, obviously, they were big in developing the wine industries in certain areas just for their own consumption, but also for trade, because they're just master trade people. And included in that was cognac and Armagnac. They kind of had, because they invented brandy or brandy wine, like fire wine or whatever they were calling it. So they actually helped even like Muscadet in some other areas that were basically just crappy for actual winemaking at the time, but made really good brandy. They really pumped a lot of development in there, and then they also helped like drain Bordeaux, and they made like the Left Bank, and they did all this other stuff. But the Dutch had a much larger influence on wine history than I really expected. So that was cool.
yeah, and I've been exploring gin more too recently, and I had never had Monkey 47, the German gin. I don't know if you know it. It's like a purple bottle. It's like fairly available. I mean, it's available. It's plenty commercially available at stores. It's around $85 for like a 750, and it's kind of seems like to me it's pretty widely regarded as one of the best gins on the market. I'm sure there's like small batch, like artisanal kind of producers who are making really crazy stuff. So I finally got a bottle the other day because I just couldn't bring myself to pay 70. What did I get it for? I think I got it for under like 85, which is where I often see it at. I think it was like 79, whatever. I bought a bottle of it, and is like mind blowing in terms of how complex, how good. There's just like, yeah, I would never let it touch tonic. I would just drink it straight. Although I drink like all of my, like I'll drink vodka straight. And so I don't really mix anything, mainly because I'm bad at it. But this stuff, yeah, I would never let it touch tonic. It's so good. So I really want to explore gin more. And if someone who's listening knows about gin and wants to correct me that Monkey 47 really isn't that great, I'd love to hear and explore some other stuff. But yeah, if you're interested at all in that, I would go out and get like a 375, just get like a half bottle. It's awesome. So good.
Wow. Nice. And maybe I will. I got into gin. I mean, I used to like gin not growing up, but like in college, because my dad used to drink it. Yeah, my dad used to drink it. So then but when I was in Australia, they're obviously big gin drinkers. I know. I got into like Four Pillars, and they also had a bunch of Japanese gin that we didn't have in the States at the time. So that was kind of cool to really like to look at it more than just a mixer for tonic. There's a lot of nuance. So
Yeah, I haven't quite come around on tonic for some reason. I just like, there aren't many things that I just like can't tolerate and won't drink or eat. But yeah, I need to keep exploring tonic as well because, like I said, I don't usually mix basically anything, and gin and tonic is just like so classic. I feel like I need to acquire a taste.
yeah, I mean, it was a tonic, so I guess it's good for you in a sense, but also tonic is also really high sugar, so also not good for you. So I mean, who knows? I'm not here to promote tonic, but I will say interesting gins are cool.
Yeah. Other than that, yeah, I haven't been drinking too much. It's been not drinking too much. Haven't been drinking a lot of wine, just because things are busy. But I'm excited to get into the spring and early summer. It gets a little bit warmer to get back into some white wines and rosés. We drink a ton of rosé through the summer.
Nice.
I should really enjoy the rosé. So
yeah, it's finally getting warm here. If any, I mean, a little behind the scenes, breaking the fourth wall. If any, I use my phone as the camera for our YouTube filming, so I can never remember like half the wines I've had. So I don't want to like plug my own Instagram, but if you go to the Unsung Vines Instagram, you can see. But I had a couple weeks. So we've been tasting a bunch, mainly just lighter natural wines as the weather's finally gotten warm here. We were at one of our favorite wine bars, and they had like a 2007 by the glass of this like random Italian wine. I'm trying to remember the variety, but it was from kind of like Campania. It was like mid Tuscan, but that was pretty cool too. Along with this Refosk from Slovenia that I had last week. I think that had like 6 years of age on it. And I don't know if you've ever had a Refosk. It's also known as Refosco sometimes. But this one basically like, it was so herbaceous, and it kind of had a little bit of a bacony nose, but it was like herbaceous. Ended, like the finish just kept going. It almost ended kind of like pine trees, which is why gin kind of just reminded me of it. But like, it was so many different flavors, and none of them really were fruit. Like maybe some really dark berries. Maggie was not into it, but it was so neat that you could just kind of sit there and it would develop, over a course of time. And that's kind of rare, like a random wine bar by the glass where everything kind of tastes like still good, but like this was distinctly different. So
yeah, unfortunately, we don't have a ton of those bars like that where I live. There's like, I think maybe like 2 or 3 that I can think of that would probably be high quality, but it's more of a cocktail city, I feel like, in Baltimore. We actually went to an urban winery. I should have went down and got the bottle as we were preparing for this, but we went to an urban winery recently, and they get all of their fruit, most of their fruit from Pennsylvania, which interesting. And I really liked their, I believe it was Blanc de Blanc sort of style sparkling.
Was it like Petit Manseng or something interesting?
Yeah, I'm trying to like you know what I guess they might have just called they might have called it a pet nat, I guess. But I forget what it was, but it was great, and I bought 2 bottles, so yeah, I should have done some preparation, but just made me think, some Pennsylvania wine, which, even though it's right next door, kind of feels like Arkansas or North Dakota wine.
Nice. Well, on the topic of drinking random wine, should we intro our guest for today, who makes a lot of wines, and he also is making some Jura wines in California, or Jura varietals. Do you want to kick it up there? Or?
That's right. Yeah. Today we have Raj Parr on the podcast. Raj is maybe America's darling sommelier, known for having an incredible palate.
Best palate in the country. Yeah.
Best palate in the country. Just really accessible from the perspective of both just incredible breadth of wine knowledge, a great communicator, also around just food, travel, and hospitality. His book, say the name of the book because it's not in my head right now.
Sommelier's Atlas.
Yes, Sommelier's Atlas of Taste. Has been a companion for me in France, and Billy I know has used it all over his travels in Europe, and he is authoritative on the wines of Burgundy, and certainly the varieties that come from there, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, which he's cultivating on the West Coast. And it just has a super different approach, I think, to things like sustainability and other topics that we talk about on the podcast a lot. And so really enjoyed talking to Raj and getting his perspective on where some of those varieties are going and kind of this in the new world that is. So some of this juxtaposition between old world, new world, especially with these varieties that, a lot of us are very familiar with, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and he's doing a great job with that.
Yeah, I feel as I just combined his first book, Sommelier's Guide to Wine, and the Sommelier's Atlas of Taste.
Atlas of Taste, yeah.
Yeah. No, he went from like restaurant, front of house, like one of the best like sommeliers in the world, like working the floor, building wine programs, to basically then traveling the world and tasting all over. And then during the pandemic decided he wanted to, lead a more sustainable lifestyle, but also, be really in touch with his wine roots. He's growing these unique varieties, and his own vineyard now that he farms by himself with, workers. He's helping grow these ancient vines here in California, not grow, but make wine from them, part of the Scolium project with this guy, Abe Schoner. He's doing so much, really interesting podcast. Can't hype it up enough.
Here's Raj. Thank you all for listening. Hey, Raj, thanks so much for joining us. Really glad to have you on the podcast today.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we've been excited to obviously chat with someone who so deep in the world of both viticulture and just like wine broadly. We don't always have someone who is such a vineyardist. So we love that about you and excited to get chatting.
Yeah, and to build before you, sorry to cut you off there, but I will fanboy for a little bit. I've read both of your books. I was at a tasting with you and Abe at Vintage recently, but it's really cool to see kind of the transition from sommelier and knowing the world through kind of a tasting profile, and then how you've transitioned into winemaking and really kind of merged the two. So I'm really excited to kind of let our listeners kind of hear about that journey a little bit, and to hear it from yourself.
Yeah, it's been a fun journey and continues. So it's not stopping yet.
Awesome. Well, can you give us a little bit of background on how kind of maybe where you started and how that I also think it's just really interesting about your background and how maybe your Rolodex of flavors maybe helped inform or maybe give you a unique perspective on tasting wine and how you got into wine, and then kind of how your career blossomed from there.
Yeah, I'll give you like a snapshot, and then you can see a segment and you can stop me or you can come back to it. I was born in India, in Calcutta, and my family was very much into food, and I remember going to the market every day with my father and picking up fresh produce. So all my life, I did not ever even knew that you could freeze anything. So frozen products is till today, there's very few things in my freezer because we never grew up that way. And but I was always interested in cooking. My family, my cousins had restaurants, so I knew from a young age that my dream was to be a chef, to have a restaurant. That's how it started. Went to hotel management school in India. Then I went to culinary school up in Hyde Park, New York, the CIA. That's where I kind of had a wine class. Before that, I had tasted wine in England with my cousins and my uncle. And wine just mesmerized me. I was, as a kid, eating grapes, and I could never imagine that a fruit could produce something so profound and had so many different layers from culture, religion, and a social aspect. And that kind of enamored me early on in my youth. And I wanted to be a sommelier. When I went to culinary school, that was, of course, I was, in culinary school, but it had a good wine class, and that's how it started. I started reading and studying and tasting. And after culinary school, I kind of switched up and, moved to San Francisco, worked with the great Larry Stone. I started off as a busboy, a food runner, kind of made my way to his assistant, and then after working with him for 3 years, I had my first kind of wine director job, and just kind of just took to it, and just kind of kept studying and learning. And I worked the restaurant floor for 18 years. With well, my last part of my career was with Michael Mina, starting in 2002, and then I was working with him till the pandemic. So I had a really good run of almost 2 decades working with the same person. And while doing that, he allowed me to do other things. So I started making wine. I started making wine in 2004, but really kind of didn't get into it, deep into it, until we started Sandhi in 2009 with Sashi. When I met Sashi in 04, all kind of changed, and we've kind of done Sandhi. We do Sandhi together. We have Domaine, Cote, we have Evening Land, and then the pandemic kind of came upon us, and I wanted to learn something else. So I never farmed a vineyard, so I moved to Cambria, where I live right now, and I had read books on farming and kind of done the theories of it, and kind of knew how it really works. So I've never done it myself, so I took upon a vineyard, I guess a farm, and kind of started grafting and learned how to raise animals and learned how to do everything by myself. So and that's where I live now. So I still kind of do different aspects of all things. I'm still involved in the original Sandhi, the Evening Land with Sashi, and then I have a vineyard I farm by myself. I have one employee. I'm going to add 2 more employees this year, so because it's the same amount of work. But I want to get a little more efficient, do some other things, start planting vegetables, and maybe expand my animal husbandry skills, get some more animals involved.
Nice.
Yeah.
What, when you first got into wine, everyone kind of has a trajectory in terms of where they were drawn to first, and now like where they've ended up in terms of their passions for specific varieties or what have you. Certainly in a region where Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and these are important to both of your portfolios. Take us through maybe what was your journey through wine, what regions first enamored you, in terms of Burgundy or what else that sort of influenced you now?
Yeah, Burgundy was definitely where it all started for me when I worked with Larry in '96, when I had my first taste of Ravenot, Beverly Leclos 86, and that kind of was the epiphany wine. And I was like, how can a wine taste like this? And at that time the wine was 10 years old, and I was just like, this is kind of crazy that a white wine can be so ethereal, so powerful, so light all at once. And that got me thinking. So I kind of went straight from knowing little about wine straight to Burgundy. So that was like my focus. And from that day onwards, I just kind of focused on Burgundy. And I didn't, many people have different, things to start and then end up in Burgundy. I was lucky I went straight to Burgundy. I was lucky that I was there when it was not that popular and famous, and it was quite inexpensive to buy it. Have a lot of friends there, have deep connections of people who I love, and it's pretty amazing to see where it is today. And 20 some years later, 25 years later, it's it's the most sought after wines in the world. A lot of times I can't afford to drink it very often, but I do admire that the early days when I was there was I still go back, and I have friends, and lucky they open a few bottles and you can still kind of reminiscent of what it was 20 years ago. But I'm really happy for the region because it deserves the kind of all the credit it gets, and it's a very special place. Northern Rhone is very close to my heart. I've been dear friends for again over 2 decades with Jean-Louis Chave and with Thierry Allemand, the Clough family. So it's been really, really amazing to see, how things have kind of evolved in a region which was kind of fairly unknown, and now it's it's among the most important wines of my life. And then recently, and I've been spending a bunch of time in the Jura and the Savoie. So I have a bunch of those varieties planted in Cambria. And I've always had a kind of a, deep connection with Austria. So I love the country. I love the people. And, Spain, I've been going recently. The last 5 years, I have some Mencia planted here in Cambria. So there's a lot of different places, it continues.
Yeah, you were just in France. Were you going for a tasting trip, or what was the purpose of that trip?
Yeah, I was in the Jura, so I have a bunch of Jura varieties planted here, and just kind of took some of the first bottled wines back to some France to taste with them and kind of see, because when I grafted, Pulsard and Sauvignon and Chardonnay Rose in a place where there was these things that never planted, so you never know what works, what doesn't work. So I wanted to take some bottles back and taste it in the Jura with people and say, "Oh, this is like what we're doing," and everyone was excited. It was, and there was a big tasting also at the same time, and then just learning. There's you never stop. It's just, for me, it's about learning, teaching.
What do you think? It's interesting that you bring up like Burgundy, say like Northern Rhone, and then the Jura in the same kind of in that order, because to your point, Burgundy is now one of the most expensive wines in the world, super popular. The Northern Rhone, I still don't feel like it gets the credit for the quality of the wines, at least in terms of a pricing point. I think it's getting some scores from critics who give that, if that's what you want to look at. But I think those are some of the most amazing wines in the world. And then I also think more and more people are discovering the Jura and Savoie. I think they're at different stages in their lives. How do you think that, I guess, how does a wine come to be properly appreciated? And does that always have to coincide with price increase in your mind? Like, does the money become necessary to help grow the wine awareness?
No, the answer is the money doesn't, but Burgundy has been making wine for, hundreds of years. And I think that, with travel and with the sommeliers around the world, there's a lot of attraction. A lot of times the monetary value is more because of demand and supply, rather than the wine itself. But also in Burgundy, they kind of created this beautiful Grand Cru, Premier Cru system, which is kind of was done to kind of homogenize, have a kind of marketing idea of of the different plots, and so they all, like a top producer in a Premier Cru sets the standard, versus the not that great producer in the same Premier Cru now has something to achieve to. And sometimes they kind of, their goal is to be as good as the top producer, and that's good. But then the price also sometimes just goes up because it's a Premier Cru, it's not, or a Grand Cru. So I think it's hard. I would say the Jura might not ever be the same as Burgundy, just because there isn't that Premier Cru, Grand Cru system. Maybe producers can, demand supply can kind of, the prices can rise, but I think it's different. I do think that where Jura is today, Burgundy was there 20 years ago maybe, but I don't think they have the same kind of Grand Cru, Premier Cru system. So I'm not sure it's going to ever be that way. Also, the wines of the Jura are more variable than the wines of Burgundy, maybe, because the soils are very similar. At least two of the grapes are the same. It's just different. I think there's there'll always be a lot of similarities, but you know, Jura, the classic Jura styles are more clay-based soils, versus in Burgundy is more kind of limestone. So you see that kind of the quality, the reduction is different in Burgundy. So there's always going to be a difference. But Jura is more kind of free-flowing. But Jura is also interesting is that on the last trip we tasted, I don't know, maybe like 6-7 different new producers, the first, second vintages.
Wow.
Which was really exciting to see. There's producers who are in their 20s making wine, because a lot of Jura is not planted yet. You know, there's like, you know, Burgundy is planted out for the most part. You plant in the Haute Cote and around, but the main vineyards are all planted. And unless your grandfather or great grandfather didn't own a parcel, it's very hard to buy land unless someone sells. The rules are quite strict. So I think Jura could follow the Burgundy idea, but I think it's always going to be very unique and very different.
And
Nice.
Burgundy, Jura, Northern Rhone. You come back to the U.S. You're going back and forth between these places. How much does the actual like geography, sense of place, those things determine when you're looking at a project here in the U.S.? What kinds of decisions you make? How much are you trying to replicate? How much are you trying to do something a little bit different and distinct? Obviously, you're maybe trying for a mix of both of those things, but how do you think through that?
Yeah, I've never thought of replicating because the weather is so different. Here we are dealing with maritime climate, so our influence is the ocean. And our summers are much cooler here, so it's quite different. I kind of modeled just my idea of, you know, maybe I'll kind of learn the tip of how they're pruning, or how they are kind of managing the canopy, that kind of stuff, or how they make the wine. So kind of like, you know, use tips, because we have very different weather. I mean, just to give an example of, in 22, we are picking most things in end of October, middle of October, versus, you know, Europe's had a kind of bunch of, like, except for 21, they've had a string of warm years. So it's hard to compare. We don't have the same soils either. You know, yeah, we have clay and quartz, and they have limestone, and I mean, you know, much older soil. So it's hard to compare. For me, it's kind of more about the philosophy, the farming, the ideas I have in my head, and try to make a wine that at least is varietally correct, but it has its own kind of maritime climate. That's why the Field on Farm Wines, I have a tagline that says "Wines of the Pacific," so it's very different than what we see in France.
You often, in many of your books or writing in general, talk about character of a wine, and I think Brady's question was kind of going to that way. What do you think are the key elements that give a wine its character?
I think I always identify the wine of 3 different things. One is, of course, where it's planted, so the soil, the geography, all of that. And then how it's planted and grown. So that's that person. That's like when the person, the man, the woman who's farming it. You know, one decision of how you prune it. One decision of, you know, are you plowing it, not plowing it? Are you using chemicals? Are you using herbicides, pesticides? Are you natural? What are you doing? And the last thing is the plant material. You know, what is, you know, what's the genetic material? Because that influences the wine. Right. So for me, those 3 things give you in a bottle of wine what it is. It's the people behind who are doing the work, and then where it is and what it is.
That's awesome. I think that's a really simplified, in like it encompasses so much, but yet it's like easy when you just think about those 3 elements. Because, you know, people always say like maybe it's the specific soil that gives something its flavor. Well, if you plant the same grape right next, you know, a Cabernet Sauvignon is going to taste different than a Sauvignon Blanc, regardless of where they're planted. So I think that's so spot on.
Yeah, and the decisions you make in the vineyard of how you're going to farm it completely change the way the wine tastes.
I have. Oh, go ahead, Brady.
I was going to say, how much of I know efforts towards sustainability, and obviously you're thinking about, you spoke to us about, you kind of have some animal husbandry going on. You're like working on gardening outside of the vineyard. How much do you think of like building an ecosystem around your projects? Maybe for you there at home with like your specific project you're kind of working on solo. How does that, how do you think about building an ecosystem? And have you had influences from some of those regions that we've been talking about that you kind of started to implement here?
Yeah, I think that is a prime importance. And this is something I didn't think about, in my previous life prior to 2020, prior to the pandemic. I was on a plane every other week. And if you invite me for a tasting in Burgundy or Rhone or New York, I would fly there, no problem. Wouldn't think twice about it, book a flight, be there, and do whatever. And so when the pandemic happened, we all could probably had different ways of kind of dealing with it, or some of us maybe took some blame or whatever you want to call it. I was like, it moved me, and when we were seeing of how many, how when air travel stopped and how environmentally changed, the satellite views of, planet Earth, and there's nothing moving above ground. It definitely moved me, and I took blame for that, and I started paying more attention to the environment. So when I decided to move to Cambria, I thought that, like, it's a very small little piece of land. It's only 11.2 acres of vines and little apples I planted, but I'm like, I will do as much as possible to keep this carbon neutral, if not carbon positive. And that's been the number one goal. Hence we have the animals, so we don't use any machinery to cut down the grass, and we use the animals on the farm, which the Phelan family have had before. So we use the manure for our compost. We use vine cuttings. We use pumice from from after the harvest. We don't do the tractor, the things which are like the obvious things of farming. And I wanted to kind of, not that my little piece of land here is going to kind of change the world, but at least it'll be my contribution to kind of stay on path of what I believe of years of my travel, and not thinking about, flying in something from somewhere, or, now if I think about, I'm going to get something, I want to grow it myself, So it's important. That was my kind of impact after, and then moving to Cambria. So I think about that a lot, and we do similar things at Domaine de la Cote and Evening Land in Oregon. We kind of try to stay as as true to the earth here. I want to take it to the highest level of what I can do personally of keeping, because if you think about it, before winery became a business, what do vineyards do? They were just in forest. They were just wild. They were just, you would make wine because you had a vineyard, or your grandfather planted a vineyard. So when I think of a vineyard, I think of a forest. I think of how do we mimic nature? Why are the animals in the vineyard? Not because I can take a photo of them and say, oh yeah, I have animals in the vineyard. No, because they are part of the ecosystem. They go and they eat. Sometimes they'll eat the vine. Sometimes they'll eat the buds. Sometimes they'll eat the shoots. We don't want that to happen, but we can't say, we want them to be in the vineyard. And if they late season come in and they eat a bunch of shoots, you know what? That's our loss, but that's the way Mother Nature is. And, if we have a problem with gophers, we have to hope that owls show up and owls take care of gophers, or snakes take care of gophers. So things what we have around us, we have to, of course, unfortunately, we have to put a fence around our vineyard, because otherwise, all the cows eat everything. But other than that, we try to kind of keep it, as close to as nature as possible. Only use compost in the vineyards, and do homeopathic sprays and things which are more kind of, not only environmentally friendly, but they are from the environment. So they're plant-based and sea-based. We use a lot of seaweed. We use a lot of things growing around us, and because what is farming? Because before farming became farming, everyone farmed. Everyone had a small garden. Everyone had a patch of land, and it all changed in the '60s and '70s. But in my very small way, my goal is to kind of keep that back together and keep it. Do what you can. This is one person here.
On the note of wild vineyards, can you talk a little bit about your work with Abe Schoner and the Scolium project and some of those really old vines?
Yeah, that's that's the ultimate goal, right? It's we kind of found some abandoned vineyards, some vineyards that hadn't been tended to in a couple of years, some longer, and kind of trying to either a farm a small piece or work with the growers and try to buy grapes so these vineyards will stay around longer, because after, if you don't harvest grapes from a vineyard, eventually someone's going to say, oh, it's abandoned, let's cut it up, build a building. And that's what's been happening down in the Cucamonga area. And we befriended the Galliano family and the current head of the family, Dominique Galliano, and he's been really, amazing with work with us and sell us grapes. Their family has been around since the 20s. They're certified organic, growing grapes and making wine, and it's just a privilege to buy grapes from them, work with them, and be a part of a community of, because back in the day, there was 40,000 acres of vines down there, and now there's 600. So it's been a real honor for Abe and myself to be involved and kind of tell the story of old vines, dry farmed, no chemicals, no sprays at all, just pruned and shoot thinning and then picked. And it's definitely something which is it's rare in this world, and the wines are delicious. So we are super proud of doing that. Again, in the part of the world people don't know that grapes exist.
Yeah, when I first moved to Los Angeles a few years ago, I read a book, and basically it was saying how this whole area was the winemaking kind of capital of California, and then Napa came later. And when you drive down in Hollywood and you see Vine Street and you see all these other great names down here, nobody knows that that was because they were actual vines. It's crazy to think about. So it's really cool that you guys found some of these old vineyards and were able to kind of bring them back to life for the Gallianos who have kept it going. So I think that's awesome. I was just gonna go back a couple steps to your note, and this is something I was kind of fascinated with in the Sommelier's Atlas of Taste, was going back to Burgundy, back to how people can impact the terroir. Well, not just people. There's two things I want to talk about. One, can you explain to our listeners what combs are and how they impact the wine, and then also the impact humans have had on the terroir in Burgundy itself, how they might have moved some soil up and down hills, or how just working it for thousands of years has impacted the area?
Yeah, because so the first thing is the combs. The comb is a small valley. When two hills come together or are separated, the little kind of gap between two hills, that's what a comb is. And when you are planting vines alongside, under the hillside, if there's a comb and your vineyard is right in the middle of the comb or below the comb, you have the cold air gushing through it. So if you're south facing, you know that your vineyard just below the comb is going to get a lot more wind than the vineyard which is maybe further south or further north. So it's a cooler spot. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative, depending on the vintage. In cool vintages, it's a negative. Warm vintages, it's a positive. So you can kind of play it the way you want to play it. And then how humans made a difference in the geology of vineyards is when they were either mining for limestone or they are mining for other things. There's still a active limestone mine in Burgundy, if not one, maybe two of them at least. And so when you are breaking down the hillside of rocks, you of course you're exposing them, and that's what. And you have breaks in. Of course, there are fault lines, and there are many fault lines in Burgundy, depending on where you are. And those fault lines also collide, and when the hillside breaks, there's the decomposed rocks that form. That bottom part becomes much rockier because a hillside just broke, and that's also something which could happen if you are mining for. Of course, nowadays it's very restricted. There's only one part you can really mine, but that's how humans kind of played a role a long time ago to create the terroir, or what is in Burgundy or anywhere in the world. You can, even now, we work with a vineyard which is not far from a mine, and you can tell that even though the mine is 2 miles up the road, it makes a difference in the formation, because you're breaking down a hillside, and when you break down a hillside, you have just, it changes the geology. So who knows, in the next generation, somebody decides to plant a vineyard below that mine, and the mine closed down, and there you go. So that is a man-made terroir.
Yeah, and can you name some of the maybe specific impacts that some of those changes can have? Like, would you notice changes like that just over a long span of time in terms of the actual product that's produced there, or the outcome of the wines there, or is it something that you could quickly notice some of those changes in the actual grapes that are produced in the wine that is made?
It takes a long time. So Brenna Quigley mentioned that. She's like, oh yeah, everything is changing by the second, and she's right, because things are moving under us all the time, especially in California. We have a lot of fault lines, and anytime you have any kind of change under the surface, things are breaking apart, and rocks are protruding up into coming up, and that's how you get these crazy jagged formations, because it happened once. And then, but it might take a whole 100 years, 50 years, 200 years to have the formation. So we can't kind of really grasp it. But I'll give you an example of, sometimes we've seen it that when a hillside breaks and all the either the schist or the granite or the rock, whatever the case, comes tumbling down the hillside, and it goes on top of the clay, for example, and then you plant a vineyard there. So here you go, you have a topsoil of rocks. So these things happen regularly. It's just that I don't think we can kind of grasp it in time, because it happens, all the time, but we cannot kind of follow that, because we might not know when it happened.
Sure, yeah.
We buy the piece of land, and that's where it is.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about.
You definitely see that when there's a river or there's a creek, and the creek maybe flows from the ocean or from another large river, and the deposits it puts on the piece of land, and the things can change. pH changes rapidly, and suddenly you have like a sandy vineyard, but under the sand there's all rocks. So all these things, they change all the time.
I guess I had in mind thinking about how much some of those changes are happening, maybe even more quickly underneath the surface, right? Just thinking of things like water sources and stuff like that. If there were maybe a shifting in plates or an earthquake in a certain region that was maybe relatively undetectable, possibly changing things underneath the surface that could impact things like your viticulture. Not sure, I don't know anything about it, but yeah, was just thinking about that as happening outside of something that you could actually see.
Oh no, 100% is definitely happening. Here's a funny story, which you may or may not know. There was a vineyard in Burgundy which somebody had bought, and they decided that they'll bring soil from another vineyard, because it was heavily eroded, and they brought soil from another vineyard. Of course, they found out that what happened, and they declassified the vineyard from Premier Cru to Village, because you had brought from another vineyard into that. So it's So you cannot do that in Burgundy. They're so regulated.
Yeah.
That's
Wow.
that's wild. What if it happened the other way? Yeah, if they brought village soil too, or no, yeah, Premier Cru soil to village, would it be?
I don't think. I think they'll make it Bourgogne then. I don't know.
Yeah.
They were making a point.
Speaking of things you can see, how have the rains impacted your vineyard? I know we've been getting soaked down here. I don't know about you guys.
Oh yeah, and we've got a ton of rain in Lompoc, and in Cambria, it's been a little bit of a disaster since it's kind of a rustic place. It's it's not. There's just one road that goes through. I have to go through a creek and then go through a second creek. So of course everything is flooded. The road is completely eroded. So I can't really drive through the vineyards anymore. I have to stop at the creek and then jump out of the creek on dry land and then walk the rest of the way. So it's so until I think the last storm is coming now this week, and hopefully after this we'll be able to rebuild the road because these vineyards where we are, there's nothing. It's a canyon, so there's no main road. Of course, there's no phone service or cell phone or internet or anything. So you don't want to get stuck there, So it's it's been the trees fell into the vineyard, the fencing. Bunch of my chickens, I guess they got lost. I don't know.
No.
No, it's I'm grateful for the rain. Don't get me wrong, but it's just been really hard since we have sheep grazing in the vineyards with all this rain and some of the vineyards. One of the vineyards part of it got flooded, so we had to kind of move them out. So it's been not an easy, I guess, early spring, but we'll take the rain. We'll never say no to rain.
Yeah, no, we've spent many minutes on this podcast trying to explain to Brady what an atmospheric river is. So, well, we don't need to belabor that point anymore, but you'd never guess unless you moved here.
Yeah, we've had, 70 odd inches of rain.
Oh, wow.
Already here, which is like last year we had, I think 18. So yeah, it's a lot.
Are there any just I was going to ask, I have no idea this in the West Coast in terms of like when you have such drastic changes in rainfall, what are the measures, like what can you do like in terms of sustainability to try and like aside from capturing it and actually capturing the rainwater, what things can you do to like help continue to like cultivate that earth so that the next time you have a drought period, you're a little bit more in better position?
Well, that's a good word to use. Cultivate. Do not cultivate. If we had plowed the soil, we would lose, of course, the carbon we've sequestered, but the moisture would be lost, and there would be lots of puddles of water. Since we have no till, so the water goes right through and goes right below the surface, and the root system of the grass and all the cover crop is going to be slow this year because it's been also cold. So it's something which if we had worked the soil or done any plowing, we would have lost a lot to erosion. But here we kind of have kept the grass, and it hasn't been tilled since it was planted in 2007. So that's important to keep it that way. That's how whenever you are in a kind of, and we have forests on almost 3 sides of most of the vineyards. So it's pretty protected by the ecosystem what's around us. So we haven't had much erosion. In one case we had some sand deposits in the middle of the vineyard, but other than that, just because of the no-till, we've been from the beginning very helpful for not the vineyards not to get eroded off.
And in times of maybe more like drier periods or drought, how does that no-till, like, do you see benefits then as you come into those periods?
Absolutely. Yeah, it definitely kind of retains the moisture on the ground for sure. Because you want to keep the microbes as much as possible. So we need the moisture. So in a dry year, of course, you have less exchange, but you want to get the root system as deep as possible. So last year was a drought year, and we decided not to irrigate, even though we have irrigation, was to kind of try to get the root system more, try to get it deeper, and try to make the vine stronger. We lost a lot of vigor, but we did hopefully gain some strength in the vine for the future, because I think we'll see these kind of extremes of either drought or rain, and yeah.
How do people measure the depth of roots in like a working vineyard without like a side of a hillside cut out? Like I've seen in like Coonawarra where you can kind of see on the side and it goes down and you're like, oh, there's where it hits limestone. I can see the roots. But like, how do you do it in like a living, no-till vineyard?
You just take a bobcat or some sort and just kind of dig a hole. Yeah, we've done a little bit, but it's there's a great geologist guy, good friend, Pedro Parra, who checks a lot of vineyards for the conductivity, and he sees how the roots going down, because he believes that he compares the root system. He says if the roots are on the top, it's like getting fast food. And when the roots go down to the bottom, that's where the real 3-star Michelin is. So the way he compares is pretty amazing. His ideas, and him and Brenna Quigley, who's a geologist, hanging out with them, you kind of, you see a lot of what they talk about with the soil and the root system. And yeah, but you can just dig a hole. You can dig a, 4 feet hole just between the rows. You have to make sure you don't do it, too late in the growing season, because you got to put it back, because the root system hopefully is going down, not sideways.
Right. Yeah. So I guess something I've kind of been curious about from all of your wines, like obviously I'd love to know how you ended up with the Jura varieties. Obviously they're a passion for this line. Can you talk about your different wines you're involved with and what makes them all different?
Yeah, so I Phelan Farm, when I drove in here first with Greg Phelan, and I saw the place, it was completely a wild canyon. It's not like most California vineyards are like, vineyard, like, and another vineyard, and here you have like a vineyard with like just a forest around it, a creek on one side, the next vineyard, another small forest all around it, a creek. So it was the small pieces of 11.2 acres in 4 different parcels, and it completely looked like you could be in Jura, Savoie, you could be in Tuscany, you could be like anywhere, and it was small pieces, and it intrigued me. I was like, this is like, I totally believe in the connection of all plants, and reading more and more about it, reading more and more about the mycorrhizal, more about the connection of different trees, different species, the diversity of plants. And in today's world, people who plant vineyards are planting other trees either in the vineyard or around the vineyard, because it's proven fact that all species are connected and are communicating. So for me, I'm like, wow, this is already like ready made. All I have to do is not mess it up. I got to come in and learn how to kind of play with nature and see what's around me and kind of use them, for each other. And it just got me super interested in farming, because at this point you just kind of learn how to dance with Mother Nature, and you kind of like, you have huge disease pressure here, and I thought that, like these varieties will kind of, they like to be, they're late ripeners, and I like fresh wine, so I'm like, it was complete like shot in the dark, but so far so good.
Where did you get your like plant material from? Like, I can't imagine there are that many nurseries just pumping out Pulsar around here.
Yeah, no, I got them from some good sources, and then I kind of built a small nursery and kind of did some testing, make sure they're clean and they're not, because I got them from people I know. I didn't get them from strangers, So
Nice.
and then kind of propagated them, and then kind of checked. And also, we are kind of alone. We have no vineyards around us. There's nothing around us, so it is dangerous to kind of plant random wines from random places. But we're in the middle of nowhere, so we have our own risk because we have only our own vineyards. The closest vineyard is maybe 3 miles away.
So how do your other 3 wines, like what makes them distinct, or the brands, the labels that you guys produce wine under? And I assume you buy fruit from there. Is it from the same sources every year, or is it different?
You're talking of Sandhi and Domaine de la Cote, Evening Land?
Yeah.
So Domaine de la Cote and Evening Land, Seven Springs, they're all 100% estate wines. So the farming is organic, biodynamic, depending on. We use a lot of regenerative principles also at Domaine de la Cote with sheep and grazing, and in Seven Springs has been farmed biodynamically since 2008. Before we took it over, Dominique Lafon was a consulting winemaker there, and he kind of converted the vineyard. And Jessica Cortell, who's the vineyard manager at Seven Springs, does an amazing job. She works with many vineyards around Oregon, and she is incredible. So the farming level, try to farm as at the highest level as possible. What I do in Cambria is a little different because we are just more secluded and kind of, I just do whatever. I do more kind of experimental stuff just to kind of learn myself and using different sprays and stuff. Winemaking wise, it's kind of similar in ways. In Cambria, we try to stay as kind of true to nature as possible, so the wines are more natural. So of course, no finding filtration in the other wines, Sandhi or Evening Land, and it's as me, it'll be that some wines could be fined or filtered. They all are sulfured for sure. And in Cambria, we don't spray any sulfur in the vineyard, and none in the cellar also. No additions. So all the field level wines, it's all bottled by hand. Everything else is so no pumps after the wine is dry. Everything but gravity. So just trying to continue the work that we do in the vineyard into the bottle, and it's very, very small compared to the others. Yeah.
And outside of the regions that you're involved with here in the U.S., I mean, we talked about Europe and some of your travels and exploration there, but is there anywhere else where you've got to do some traveling here in the U.S., either, even I'm on the East Coast, so other places in the U.S. that have kind of caught your attention or that you're excited about, potential in these places?
There always is. I just don't know if I have the capacity anymore to do it. Looking at the soil in Michigan, that would be one place. Maybe someday I hope someone does something magical, because the limestone there is pretty extraordinary, and it was brought to my attention by Brenna, who lives in Michigan. And but at this point, you have one life, and you can only do that much. So I think Cambria is it for me. I'm not sure I can have the capacity. I want to, but I'm not sure that I can.
Yeah. So there's definitely producers and folks in some of those other regions that you sort of have your eye on, even though you won't be maybe going out there yourself anytime soon to start something up.
Oh yeah, no. I hope that we see something really amazing from Michigan, because it's extreme weather for sure, but I think I'm sure the right people will find the right place and the right way to make wine.
I was gonna say we had Christy from Vino Head. I can't remember. I'm trying to remember her last name. I don't know why it's escaping me. Christy Wenz. She actually just moved to Oregon, but she was more from like the Chicago, Michigan area, and she spent like 15-20 minutes kind of just explaining to us the quality of Michigan wines and how potentially with climate change that could continue to evolve, not only due to the soils, but just because of the viability. I know climate change is like a sore spot. I know it's not necessarily a good thing overall, but do you think it's going to positively impact the consistency of production, say somewhere like Spätburgunder in Germany, or like some of those Rieslings, or are we just going to start losing classical styles of wine in cooler areas?
Yeah, the best example is 2021, and that's all over Europe. If you have a 2021 Northern Rhone, it'll be either 12% or under, unless they chaptalize. And if you have a 2020 or 2022, and that'll be 14.5%.
That's wild.
And that's just one vintage you've seen in that era. And now the best example, talking of Germany, is 2021. I had a couple of 2021s just a few days ago, and unbelievable acidity. I mean, insane. Like there's so much. There's an article by Eric Asimov about the return of Cabernet thing, because you stopped seeing Cabernet because Cabernet at 10.5% alcohol is a new thing, but also the sugar levels are so high. But here in 21, there's so many Cabernets at 8.5% with lots of acidity, and that's how wine was back in the 80s, and it started changing in the mid 90s, and by 2000 it had evolved into a whole different style of wine. So and also the off-dry style of wines, they were the majority of the wines produced in Germany, and now they are the minority of the wines produced in Germany, especially in the Mosel and the Rheingau region, which has become mostly dry now. And we might just in this lifetime lose the whole style of wine.
I know they weren't able to make ice wine a couple of years ago. I know that, so that's
ice wine is getting harder because you don't have the freeze days so late.
In Chateauneuf de Pape, I know you mentioned there was a distinct time where it kind of shifted over for you. It used to be one of your favorites, and now it was made. Was that more of a winemaking decision, trying to go with make a bigger wine for the times, or was that also just working with the climate that was just ripening the grapes too much?
I think the climate, the ripening the grapes, because people were also, had a lot of Grenache planted, and Grenache ripens slow as maturity, but the sugar accumulates very fast. So to get the same phenolic ripeness at 13.5, you'd have to wait to 15.5 to get the same. But many people were kind of changing from that to Mourvèdre. The Mourvèdre is a different grape because Mourvèdre usually kind of very slow sugar accumulation. So you can pick quite late still at a lower alcohol. But then the thing is, Mourvèdre is not as sweet and voluptuous. It's more kind of austere and more leathery and smoky kind of flavors. So, people are going more to Grenache, and I think, the future is Mourvèdre in a warm climate because it's a really, really great grape. And, Sanso, another fantastic grape. But these grapes, they kind of stop ripening at around 14%. So they kind of, they ripen, but they'll kind of start shriveling. So you can pick them at optimal ripeness at around 14%.
Nice. Yeah. I've seen, it might be just the Northern California ones, expressions of it, but some older vine Carignan and just Carignan in general, I feel like that's becoming a necessity for some of these for that acid kind of pick up for some of these wines that are getting too ripe. Yeah, for sure. Carignan is also a difficult grape to kind of, it's high mildew pressure in Carignan. And the best versions are delicious. Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess last question, I'll let Brady hop in. My partner and I are traveling down to the south. I guess it's going to be Southern Rhone and also up into Provence because she wants to do that. Do you have anybody aside from Domaine Tempier or something that you would recommend that is kind of a must visit? Or...
Yeah, I mean, in Bandol, there's a lot of places, but I think you should definitely go to Cassis.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be the spot to go. Cassis is amazing. Belay, a small appellation, but Cassis is incredible, and there's a Kermit producer, Motherland.
Okay.
It's called Madeleine, and they're in Cassis, and it's the most beautiful vineyards I've ever seen in my life. And it's pretty extraordinary. It's because and you go to Provence, sometimes you just get it's just you get bored because of it's all tourist traps. But when you go to Cassis, you'll see how beautiful it is, and I would highly recommend that.
Perfect. I appreciate that. Yeah, we're definitely going. She wants to go to the Palanques or those things that whatever they're called. So Cassis was on the roadmap. So cool. Thank you.
Awesome.
Nice. Well, Raj, I really appreciate the time that you spent with us. It feels like sitting at the feet of a sage. So I hope that our listeners are excited to hear some of your perspectives on these things, and certainly how the old world and the new world compare and contrast one another. I think you're a great voice for that in the industry. Certainly, our sort of focus is investment in these wines, and so it's a lot of the producers and a lot of these kind of historic producers are doing things, quote unquote, the right way, the way that like you're sort of, bringing some of that, what's called maybe a revival here on the West Coast, kind of returning to some of these old ways of thinking about viticulture and, things that have been done for a really long time. So certainly put you right up there with, folks doing the most incredible things in the wine world. So we appreciate you sharing.
Nice.
And we'll drop some, yeah, of course. Yeah, we'll drop some notes in the show description so that people can find your wines, obviously, and get in touch with you. And we just hope to stay in touch.
Yeah. There's one more wine I actually never didn't mention. One of my most favorite regions, which I miss a lot because it's hard for me to travel because we have the late season here in Cambria. But Piedmont, in Italy, it's really an amazing place. Definitely, some of the most undervalued wines in the world are in Piedmont. So yeah, it's been going there for many years.
You'll be happy to know. I mean, I've read it elsewhere, but your description in along with Jordan in the Sommelier Atlas of Piedmont, I went last November just because like you made it sound so exciting. I got like a couple buddies and it really lived up to it. So yeah, I agree. Yeah,
great. A good place to be in November.
Oh yeah, we had so many truffles and so much great wine. And outside of just the Nebbiolo too, it was just so cool to see all the other varieties that are out there. So it was awesome.
Great.
Cool. All right, thank you so much.
Cool, thank you.
All right, and that was our interview with the one and only Raj Parr. I hope everybody enjoyed it. As Brady said, it was kind of sitting at the feet of a master. It was very interesting. We could hear him talk for hours. I mean, not just about sustainability, but also about his, all of his experiences tasting so many wines over the years and his kind of encyclopedic mind and masterful tasting skills. So I hope you all enjoyed. It was sure a pleasure for us, and we'll be back next week with another episode. Cheers.
To check out our current offerings and to sign up for the Vint platform, find us at www.vint.co. That's www.vint.co. For questions, comments, or feedback on the Vint podcast, please email us at support@vint.co. Vint and VV Markets are offering securities pursuant to Regulation A. Our offering circular as amended can be found on the SEC website. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Investments such as those on the Vint platform are speculative and involve substantial risks to consider before investing. We may provide communication that may contain certain forward-looking statements that are subject to various risks and uncertainties. Information provided in any communications, including this podcast, is not legal, business, or tax advice. All prospective investors should consult a legal, tax, or business advisor concerning the subject matter of any communications and any offering.